Hi everyone. Today it is my great pleasure to be talking with Dr. Rachel Willie. Rachel is Reader in Early Modern Literary Studies at Liverpool John Moores University. She is the author of Staging the Revolution, Drama, Reinvention and History, 1647 to 1672. With Kevin Killeen and Helen Smith, she co-edited the Oxford Handbook of the Bible in Early Modern England, and recently in 2020, she co-edited with Gabor Gellery the volume Travel and Conflict in the Early Modern World, which is published by Routledge, which I can very highly recommend. Rachel is also the PI on the AHRC-funded Early Modern Soundscapes Network, and happily for us, she is the Honorary Secretary of the Society of Renaissance Studies. And as a linchpin of the Society and of the Society's Council, since the beginning of the pandemic, Rachel has organised extraordinary events and an extraordinary number of events online using the Society's Crowdcast platform. I know many of you will have attended seminars, conversations, book launches organised through the Society's Crowdcast platform. And what I'm hoping to do in my conversation with Rachel today is to talk a little bit about the opportunities and challenges of running online events of this kind in a pandemic era and hopefully beyond. So hi, Rachel, great to have you.
Hello, thank you for inviting me.
It's wonderful to have you here. So I wondered if we could kind of go back to the superhero origin story and ask you a little bit about how this all came to be and what prompted you to start looking at online events for the SRS.
I think, well, it started with a realization that there was a very real need to find ways of basically just keeping our little community going during this time when we were all told to stay at home, and the fact that the pandemic came so close to the major North American conferences in our field, so the RSA, obviously, for literary scholars, the particularly Shakespeare scholars, the SAA, and the real, I mean, obviously everyone completely understood why they were cancelled, but I think there was also the understandable disappointment about it as well. And in a way, I think we, with the SRS, were lucky with the timing that we could plan for what would happen if our conference was equally affected by the pandemic in a way that the North American conferences just couldn't. And so it was sort of looking at the general response to the moment, I guess, and trying to find a way through that could keep the conversations going. So I researched various platforms because I think we were all beginning to realise that there was this thing called Zoom that we should be more involved with.
And, hard to imagine a day when Zoom wasn't a feature of our everyday life.
Indeed. The reason we decided not to go for Zoom was partly I was suggested, Crowdcast was suggested to me actually by my brother, who had it mentioned to him by a friend of his who works in marketing and uses it for all sorts of more kind of, I guess, corporate events. And I went along to a session which Sai, the CEO, did. And frankly, he's such a smooth talker, he could probably have sold me scrunched up newspaper. But what I really liked about the platform was the fact that the chat was available before the session, so that there was a way of interacting and replicating as much as possible, I guess, though obviously not the identical to a face-to-face meeting, but giving the opportunity for people to talk to each other and, you know, just get that sense and fostering a sense of community. And whilst that's happening, the speakers can prepare and make sure the technology is working. So there is that private space for the speakers to make sure that everything which you need to ensure is functioning adequately is working, whilst you're still having the auditors joining and interacting with each other. So it doesn't have all the bells and whistles of Zoom, so there are some workarounds you need to put in place. But for our needs, I think it's a more collegiate platform, and the the feedback I've had from people as well is that some of them actually many of the auditors prefer the fact that it's not Zoom, because it's taken a step back from the platform they need to use for teaching and for meetings and various administrative tasks. And so it feels a little bit like a holiday from the screen, even though you're still on screen. I put together a proposal, which you would obviously have seen as a council member, just outlining in very broad details the kinds of things that we could do. And we trialled an event with Erin McCarthy, who's based in Australia, who very kindly agreed to be our guinea pig. And we did a book launch. So poor Erin had to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning because we had, she was in Newcastle.
You should say this is not standard for presenters at SRS events. You can do it in the afternoon if you like.
Yeah. So Erin was up at 5 o'clock in the morning, ready for, I think it was 8 o'clock actually in the UK, but obviously with all the time zones. And then we had Daniel Starr-Smith as chair in London, and we had various other speakers from the USA as well. So it really was a global event, and it was a great. Obviously, it was a great experience in terms of finding out what went wrong and what went right, and how to do it better in the future. But Erin made it all look so effortless in the way that she responded and interacted, that it just really underscored the fact that this was something which was both necessary and not as difficult to do as we thought it might be. So it kind of stayed and took off.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's been clear is that obviously you've shepherded great numbers of people through the nuts and bolts of the system, but it seems kind of reasonably user friendly. But I love as well what you say about that sense of community. There's this kind of great live chat ongoing. And one of the things I really enjoy when I sign into an SRS event is everyone pinging in from wherever they are in the world.
Yeah.
So, at Fabrizio Nevella's launch recently, people from Italy, people in Australia, people in the States, just chatting away happily in the comments. And I really feel what you say as well about Zoom fatigue. It's quite nice that you're not required to be, you don't even have to make a decision about being on camera. If you're an attendee, you're just happy you can kind of sit there and no one is going to see you staring at the window, daydreaming or responding to things or something like that. There's a great kind of question function as well, which is really good for discussions. I wondered if we could chat a bit about, so you'd found a platform and you'd run that wonderful event with Erin as a trial. Obviously, in some ways, the rest is history, right? They've been saying.
Yes.
What happened in terms of recruitment and getting interest? And did you have people coming to you? Did you feel like you had to kind of chase people up? How did you wind up with such a rich and varied program?
Serendipity mainly. It's been a mixture of me contacting people and people coming to me. Most of the book launches have been by people soliciting us to put them on for them, and some of the seminars are a mixture of the two. When we were thinking about processes, we deliberately kept things loose, but I did a bit of reading about the differences between face-to-face meetings and online meetings, and so put together a few suggestions about the ways in which these sessions could take place. And one of the things which came through in all the reading that I did was that the traditional 20-minute 3-paper panel or plenary session doesn't work quite as well online, because our attention spans don't work in quite the same way as they would in a face-to-face session. Though I think with time, because the sheer amount of time we spend online, I think our ways of paying attention are getting more tolerant, I guess, of the platforms. So we as a general rule, we recommend keeping it to an hour, but often the conversations become so lively that the Q&A continues for maybe about an hour and a half. We also rarely start on time, and that's not because the technology isn't working and we're frantically running around, or often it's not because the technology is not working, we're frantically running around trying to find patches and fixes. It's because in the space behind the scenes, it's called the green room, and often the speakers are so relaxed in there and catching up that it's difficult to get them out onto the stage to present. So and I think that as well is a really great a great thing about this sort of platform, because it gives the speakers that down space that everyone needs just before giving a presentation, where they can settle and feel relaxed with each other. So I'm rambling. I've actually forgotten your question.
So we were talking, but I think it's really interesting, because I think that's an area, or that's one of the ways in which you get this kind of maybe more conversational and friendly kind of feeling that I think is a hallmark of these events. But we're talking a bit about recruitment. So you said that, you know, you chased up some people had approached you as well. So you kind of, it seems like there was a really great kind of level of interest in running stuff, and a real appetite for online events as well.
And early on, I mean, we put on the SRS website, which everyone's obviously welcome to go to, some details about, yes, the wonderful, glorious website as well, but we'll just kind of flag that up as well. But there's one of the blog posts on there is detailing information. So if anyone would like to do a crowdcast, then you can obviously contact us via the contact form, and the methods or suggestions that we put together are all detailed there. Obviously, with online platforms, there are issues around consent regarding recording and dissemination. And I think partly because I think we initially saw this as a quick fix through the pandemic period that would probably disappear once everything got back to normal and we all enjoyed our, face-to-face activities again. I think we're now at the stage where we need to start thinking more carefully about questions around how long we keep recordings up of sessions, because people still are logging in and watching sessions from several months ago, which is great because it shows the interest. But obviously there does come a point where for scholars who very generously shared their research with us, whether they still want to continue sharing the research. So I think the next step in the process will be to work out protocols regarding how long recordings remain on our channel. We always give speakers the option of having their video archived immediately, so they don't have to keep it on the channel for forevermore. And so far, actually, only one session has requested that, which I think shows the enormous generosity of our community, really.
Yeah, and it's great. I'm conscious of, it's almost like my Netflix, right? I have a backlog of sessions that I couldn't get to at the time, and I'm hoping to chase up. I suppose, Rachel, one thing that's really key here is that, the audiences for these events have been really large, so much larger in many cases than people that would be able to come to a kind of in-person seminar. And now for me, this can only be, anecdotal, or kind of, I can only say what I've seen, but they seem to be more diverse in terms of backgrounds, in terms of makeup, in terms of, whether people are in academia or not. Do you have a sense of the kind of audiences that the crowdcasts are reaching?
It's global, which again is great. Each crowdcast actually has its own analytics that you can take a look at afterwards if you're so inclined. And the critical mass tends to be, at least for watching live, tends to be Europe and North America. I think partly because of matters of time, and obviously it's very dedicated of some people to, wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning to watch them. But when there's the opportunity to watch them more leisurely and more convenient time, I can completely understand why people take it. And the number that because I leave up, though there is the opportunity of hiding the registration list, so people know who is attending with them, which I do, so that there's because it enhances that sense of collegiality when you know that you're not just a lone individual sitting in a room watching something, and that there are 100 other people watching with you, whatever. And usually the number who watch live is about 75% of the number who've registered to watch it.
Which is an incredible conversion rate. It's
yeah,
really strong.
And 60%. So
it's still extraordinarily good, I think.
I'm now wondering, should we cut this around a bit so it looks so I gave the correct number immediately?
I think, to be honest, I think 60% is really fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about kind of running online seminars more generally,
Yeah.
or even in-person ones. If you think about the number of people on a mailing list as distinct from people in the room on any given day. Yeah, it's fantastic.
Absolutely, yeah. And a number of people actually, we've now got, last time I looked, it was something like 270 or 280 people following our Crowdcast channel. And they get a notification whenever a Crowdcast is about to start. And usually we get about 20 or 30 people log in as a direct consequence of seeing it advertised through there. And I encourage speakers to advertise through their networks when they're talking, because obviously we advertise it too, but they know who their kind of research buddies are in a way, and who will be most interested in watching it. Whereas we have more of a kind of scattered approach, and I mean I've learned so much from watching them, and we had one session just before Christmas, Thinking with Metals, which Emily Rowe at Newcastle University organised. And the chat and the enthusiasm was utterly extraordinary. You could see that this was the start of something which could develop into something really quite interesting more broadly. And we've hosted one event for the Medieval and Early Modern Orients project. And we'll be hosting a few more in the coming months. And just the sheer diversity in terms of approach as well. And I think it's a really exciting time for Renaissance studies, actually, in terms of thinking about the global Renaissance and decolonising measures, which I know have had a rather negative reception in the press, but are very necessary and vital if we want our research and our profession to remain vibrant.
Absolutely. And it's so great to be kind of facilitating and being part of those conversations, I think, and, and for them to be happening in that constructive way. I suppose, there might be a question, I don't know to what extent. You mentioned kind of negative reactions to things, and we're all conscious that there are areas of the scholarly community and members of the scholarly community who've come in for really egregious attacks in various ways recently. I don't know if that's something that's been reflected at all on the platform. I guess it's global in public nature, I presume. Means it's certainly possible that it would be possible for people to come and attempt to derail or something like that. Is that something you've had to deal with at all?
Actually, surprisingly, no. It's been because that's obviously something which I was aware of, and I think we as a society were aware of the possibility for trolling or inappropriate behaviour online, and so we put in place a disclaimer to reserve the right to remove anyone from the platform who not in a silencing differences of opinion, more that in terms of thinking about respectful behaviour, and the Crowdcast actually has a little icon which is shaped like a mallet, which you can use to take people out if they are trolling or misbehaving. And with great disappointment, I've never had to use it.
The mallet remains pristine.
Because the goodwill and collegiality which has governed the way in which people have come to these events has just been phenomenal. And I was actually very surprised because I went along to a talk that the head of technology for Hay Festival gave on the Crowdcast, where he was reflecting upon their experiences of using the platform for the Hay Festival. And he mentioned that despite having, the hundreds of thousands of visitors that they have over the course of the Hay Festival, and dealing with extremely sensitive information and having quite sensitive discussions, which at times meant that they had to intervene in terms of having pastoral support for auditors. Not once did they actually need to ban anyone for trolling. And I can't think of another situation where you can expect that kind of scenario on a social media platform.
It's incredibly maybe even cause for optimism, God forbid, in the year of our Lord 2021. That's really fantastic, Rachel. I was going to ask about a couple of different things, but actually, one of the, well, before I get into everything else, I wanted to ask a bit about publicity. So you mentioned having the, that people can subscribe to the Crowdcast channel. Obviously, our SRS Twitter account has a distinctive and much loved voice. Which Rachel, I don't know, am I revealing something I shouldn't be revealing? I say that you were the person behind crafting that voice and behind a kind of Jets and Sharks like rivalry with the Renaissance Society of America. No, I feel like we should develop one. I feel like maybe it's time that we developed a kind of online feud, but that's something for a council meeting.
Our older big cousins across the pond.
Exactly. Yeah, we should. We'll come to them soon on Twitter and get something started. But no,
what John is revealing is that every time I write a report for the SRS Council where I talk about the numbers of Twitter followers we have, I always point out how many more followers we now have than the RSA.
This is going to descend into tit for tat thing, you know. No doubt there'll be the war of the gifts will emerge from this. No, but I wanted to ask about kind of, you know, the SRS in many ways has that kind of finely honed publicity machine, in large part thanks to your own work, Rachel. And do you want to tell us a little bit more about, you know, how you get the word out about events of this kind?
Well, I do it in a couple of ways for the SRS. Firstly, I will tweet about it, but also, as I said, relying upon the speakers to share it with their networks. Yeah. I mean, I'm a little bit careful of sending too many emails to our members because there can become, you know, mail overload and mail fatigue. But when there is some important information to announce from Richard Vistrick, our beloved chair, then I will always send information about the events which are coming up as well, so that our members know what's happening. And also, I guess the general mailing lists that we are all members of as well, just drawing them to the attention of those too. So in a way, something that we were quite keen to do early on is ensure that this was an inclusive platform, and that it wasn't just the I mean, obviously it's really great to hear from the great and the good established scholars, but hear what more junior scholars and PhD candidates are doing, and because they're the shape and future of our profession.
Absolutely. And I think you've seen that as well in the diversity of kinds of events, from those kind of, you know, book launches and seminars to kind of more informal conversations or roundtables and things like that. And that's been really interesting. I think, you know, in general, that's a development I think that's valuable across our different fields, is this shift away from this is what a seminar is.
Yeah.
But it's also allowed for, I think, different kinds of conversations and different kinds of voices, which is really, really great. I wondered if I could ask a little, though, about, you know, this is the amount that you've done on this is absolutely extraordinary. And I wondered if I could ask a little bit about kind of the work and the workload that would go into it, you know, because one of the functions of these videos is to help equip and inform people who might be interested in pursuing things like this, whether as part of their own research projects, within their own fields, or something like that. You know, this is obviously a lot of work. I wondered if you wanted to reflect a little bit on just the kind of the workload that goes into it, really.
Sure. Well, depending upon whether the person has contacted me or I've contacted them, usually when I've contacted somebody, it's either I've done it through two ways. So either just randomly appear in someone's inbox and say, would you like to organise one of these? And leave it up to them to work out what shape or format or structure it will take, with a little bit of guidance about the kinds of events we think have worked in the past in terms of format, though not intellectual content. That's entirely up to them. Very, very early on, probably in April, May or June time, I put out a survey on Twitter asking both ECRs if they were interested in presenting, and established academics if they were interested in sharing. And I received quite a few responses from that, which I'm very slowly working through. And sometimes I've paired together people on the basis of their responses to that, or contacted one person and said, would you like to develop this into something? Or even contacted people who haven't filled out that form, because I know their research and know that it will speak quite nicely to the research interests of the other person. So that's, I guess, is a more involved way that I've done it. But usually it's just a case of suggesting to someone that they might like to organise something and then see what comes of it. And yeah, because when we started it, we initially envisaged it as a let people come to us rather than we go to them, and very much a sort of hands off. And yeah, as I said, it's sort of become a mixture of hands off and a little bit more guidance. In terms of the information I give, I send quite a detailed email about what the platform does, so that people know what to expect of it, and also offer them the opportunity to meet me online on it, to be introduced to it beforehand if they want to, because even though we're all completely used to online platforms now, and they've become they have become a way of life, and pretty much the only way we interact with people now. Each platform has its own quirks, and I think particularly for neurodivergent people, but for people generally, just knowing what space you're occupying is part of the process, and feeling comfortable enough and able to present. And I think for me, the making sure that the speakers are feeling comfortable is the key, because you can't do your best if you are nervous or anxious.
Absolutely. And I think actually, that's an element of the work that, might have gone unseen in some ways, is, having to work out in the early days what the quirks of the platform are, but also then creating, as you say, that documentation, which can then give people really clear guidelines. And I know from speaking to people who've engaged in these events that, people who've organized events have found it really helpful that so much of that is made explicit and is extremely clear.
Good.
So
That's good.
yeah, no, it's been, it's been made as really as user-friendly as possible. But I think that's, coming back to that question of workload, again, that's something people should bear in mind, as well as, that things that might seem particularly user-friendly from the off, it's still helpful to have clear and explicit instructions, and that those can, as you say, can engage with questions that are technical, but also broader questions about how we run events and the kinds of conversation that we hope to foster. So I think that's really, really helpful. I wanted to ask a little bit about I was going to ask about the behind the scenes. Now, I feel like we've kind of covered kind of a lot of the nuts and bolts in some ways, but I don't know if there was anything else you wanted to say about the experience of running these, when you're kind of sitting there as kind of as the organizer or the person kind of running the show. Are there particular things that, that you see that you're trying to remain aware of? Are there things that, as the kind of the event organizer, you feel you would say, oh, you must know this?
Yeah, I mean, I think being aware of the potential technical shortfalls of the platform you're using, because all platforms have their pros and their cons, and knowing how to fix them if they go wrong during a live stream. I mean, obviously, there's some things that you have absolutely no control over, and bandwidth, connectivity issues are obviously the prime ones. But one of the quirks of Crowdcast is that if auditors are experiencing connectivity issues, refreshing your browser usually clears it all and brings everything back. And so every now and then I'll put in the chat just general technical advice in case there is an auditor who's been struggling in silence and wants some assistance. But also just reminding people in the chat to ask questions if they like, and how they can upvote, because again, you mentioned the question and answer box, but the fact that you can, if you see a question that you really like and you would like to hear answer, you can upvote it to let the chair know. And So I kind of see my role in this as a sort of disembodied ghost in the machine to deal with those well, quite boring technical aspects, so that the chair can focus upon the intellectual content,
Mhm.
and doesn't have to worry about what the platform's doing as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's clear that so much of that work goes in. Just to clarify as well, for people who might not have seen the platform before, it's something that's really helpful is that you have a chat box, but you have a separate questions box so that people can be, sometimes you lose questions in the general chatter or the kind of back and forth. But actually here, if you choose to ask a question that you want to be put to the panel, you can use this specific box. And as you say, then people can add votes to suggest that it's a question they also want to see answered. For instance, I often find it nerve-wracking actually when I put a question in the question box. Thinking, oh, I hope people don't hate it.
What if no one likes it?
Exactly. It's a kind of popularity contest all over again. But that's really helpful to know as well. And I thought just to finish up, Rachel, we could think a little bit about what you see as the benefits of running events of this kind, whether that's to the society, to the field, or fields more broadly. Because as you say, this started as something that was kind of a stopgap or an emergency response. And it seems clear to me that over the time that these crowdcasts have been running, they've taken on a new set of roles. And maybe, in our conversations, you talked about how maybe your views on what these events represent and what they can do has shifted. I wondered if you had a sense of the benefits and maybe the potential pitfalls, if you see any, of virtual events of this kind as we look forward to what hopefully will be a post-pandemic future.
Yeah, it's something I've been thinking about a lot lately and have yet to come to any conclusions about, because the obvious benefit is accessibility, that we can all go and watch these events and in our own time as well, but in a way I think that's also a drawback in a way, because with more accessibility, when we're already time poor, the fear of missing out kind of mentality really takes over.
Skyrockets.
Plus, in a way, we have a glut of riches in terms of what we can watch online now. And what I'm less clear on is how our face-to-face experiences and our online experiences are going to be post-pandemic, because these are obviously at the moment the best way that we can meet, because it provides us with access to the outside world in a way that we don't have at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think anyone feels that they prefer this to the actual physical being in a room with other people and talking. And actually the things that I miss from face-to-face meetings aren't so much listening to the seminar paper, because we can do that, but it's the pre-seminar conversations and the post-seminar conversations and serendipitous sort of one-on-one conversations that you can have in that environment, which you can't have online because of just the way that screens work. And so yeah, I think my big I don't have the answer to this yet sort of question is, how do we build in blended models that we can still have the best from face-to-face experiences but still have the accessibility of online platforms? But even then, I think that presents challenges, because accessibility of online platforms assumes that everyone's hooked up to the internet and has stable connections. So it's not as clear as it might seem that one gives accessibility and the other doesn't.
Absolutely. But I mean, it is one of those things as well, that as well as these kind of broader questions of accessibility, which are so important, and engagement of a more diverse, more global audience. It's really interesting that the last year has kind of really supercharged some of these conversations about the carbon impact and the environmental impact of some of the conferences that we attend as standard, and having to do this wholly choreographed experiment in online platforms will hopefully have a bunch of beneficial outcomes for the fields we work in as time goes on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've as I'm sure many people are doing, have been re-evaluating whether I should travel for conferences as much as I used to do. I mean, I never actually took holidays. I would, if I was traveling somewhere for a conference, I would spend an extra few days and that would be my holiday. So and that was the way that I felt like I was being virtuous and cutting down my carbon footprint. But yeah, it's I think it is an increasingly urgent question that we need to address, particularly as, well, we've proven we can do this remotely. We don't have to visit a place in order to have a conference.
So it's going to be very exciting to see what conferences look like and what events like this look like in the future. Rachel, thank you so much for taking the time. I know that I am one of hundreds of SRS members and thousands of members of the wider community who have benefited in such a great way from the kind of the community and the scholarly insights and just the sheer fun of the events that you've been running through Crowdcast. And I think it's very, very exciting. People can, of course, check them out through the SRS website, through our Crowdcast channel. And yeah, well, thank you so much for coming along, Rachel. It's been brilliant to talk to you.
Thank you very much, John. It's been great to talk to you too.